Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello and welcome to the Clean Library Podcast. My name is Marcus Williams, and today I'm with special guest author Rebekah Isert. Rebekah chose to become a writer rather than an optometrist. She enjoys writing, watching martial arts movies, and reading whatever sounds interesting. She loves to write fantasy, but delights in the right to write whatever story captures her imagination, including science fiction and contemporary mystery. She currently lives in the West, but given her propensity to travel, could realistically turn up anywhere at any time. Thank you, Rebekah, for being on the show with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get started, we are going to jump into your two truths and a lie. And the fact that Brock has missed the past couple episodes has been good for me because in our scorecard, I'm starting to catch up. So the good thing is I can't fall behind. I can only catch up. So
yes,
we get one step closer today. All right. So here they are. Number one, I ate camel in a restaurant in Dubai, UAE. Number two, I once fell on a table in front of several well-known authors and publishers during a writing conference because I was dancing too vigorously. And three, I spent my teenage years in England. All right. So we will go back to those here at the end.
I'd like to say two truths and a lie is really hard for me because I'm really actually that really bad at lying. And so it was like kind of like what sounds plausible, but not like, or implausible, but not like too implausible, but just implausible enough. Yeah. Like,
and sometimes the best lies have a little bit of truth in them.
Yes.
So we'll see what we can do there. To get started, why don't you tell us how you first got into writing? Like what drove you to write a book? Because it's not an easy thing to do.
It's really not. And I kind of started discovering that at a pretty young age. I've always been telling stories. Like one of my favorite anecdotes from my childhood is one that my mom told me one time where she found me like sobbing in the bathroom at like 3 years old. And she came in and she goes, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was like, my imaginary friend died. And she's like, what? And I'm like, no, she died. And she's like, had to explain to me like this, imaginary friends are imaginary. Like, like you can control the narrative a little bit here. And so like ever since then, like in first grade, I wrote a short story with the Flying Purple People Eater because that's what my brain came up with. Like, and I got a medal for that. They started giving me, chunky prizes from a young age. So I'm like, ooh, shiny, kind of thing. So partially the magpie brain went off. I really started writing, I don't want to say seriously because that sounds very sanctimonious, but like I started writing consistently at about 11 years old, where I watched Lord of the Rings for the first time and my little fan fiction brain went and I started out there. This first tangent of the day, I really love fan fiction for a very specific reason, and it's because it's one of the most perfect workshops that you could ever do. Because if you want to work on character, you can work on character and leave the rest alone and work in somebody else's setting. If you want to work on setting, you bring in characters, work on the setting a little bit. Right. And so I cut my teeth in fan fiction, and then I wrote a Batman fan fiction because that's what you do. And from there, it kind of spiraled off from there. Around when I finished the Batman fan fiction, which was the first book that I'd ever finished. I was 16 years old, I think, when I finished it, 15 or 16. And it kind of sparked, like, I'm like, I want to do this, but like with my own stuff. And so I started playing around a little bit more because I had so much fun. Like, is it canonically Batman? No, like it's my own stuff, basically. Right, like you could change the names and it turns into something completely different. But like it just kind of snowballed from there. So I started writing a book that I have not published yet but still plan to when I was 18, and then went to college, took a whole bunch of writing courses. I thought I was going to go into medicine when I first went into college, but joke's on me, turned into English. And I was fortunate enough to be very supported by my parents, and I've used my degree in my actual career, which is not writing. And so it's been nice, like just that way. But I actually started writing my own actual books in 2019. Like I finished the first draft of that book that I'm still working on. In its entirety, because it's a 4-book series. I write books as stories, not in volumes. And so, like, if I do write a series, we'll get into this later, I promise. But if I do write a series, I write all the books at once, and then I edit and move them on from there. But I finished my first one in 2020 on Memorial Day, because why not? Auspicious date. And then from there, I've just kept on writing. So it's really been a part of my life for a really long time. And I've enjoyed it. Like, it's always been the stories and the people and stuff that keep on dragging me back in. There have been periods where I haven't written. College, I found, is really difficult to write in because you've got so much information going in. It's not necessarily media. And so I didn't write very much during college at all. But like after I finished college, it was about a year after college is when I started really in earnest writing my own fiction for me. So
cool.
But I've always loved
it. Was there a point in time when you said, you know, I'm going to publish this stuff and let other people read it?
So it's always been the plan. But so I have written a couple of books, but my first book I ever published was called Wednesday's Book. And it was published January 1st of 2021. And my oldest sister read it as I was writing it and just enjoyed it. It's ballet and cats and mystery and urban fantasy and smushed all together and, you know, called a book. And she really loved it and wanted a copy of it. And I, in my was like, oh, I'll give her a copy, thinking, you know, I'll go to a nice little press. I'll have them make one book. Like, it'll be great. And it was December 3rd. And I was sitting in the room with I have 3 older sisters, and it was my third, the one just older than me. And I was sitting in the room with her, and I was like, you know, it'd be so much fun. You know, like, wouldn't it be crazy if I just, you know, published it instead and didn't tell my sister? And like this oldest sister, and she's like, why not? And I didn't have a good answer for her. And so my first book, from deciding to publish to actual publishing, was 28 days, which I do not recommend. It was nuts. There were a whole bunch of problems, which have mostly been fixed since. Like, thankfully, with Kindle Direct Publishing and stuff like that, they do allow you to re-upload things. So as we found all the 97 typos in there and fixed a couple of the wording issues and the missing words, which is my most common error to fix. Like, it's come up to speed, and it's now. It was never a book that I wasn't proud of. Like, I've consistently gotten really good feedback on it, but it was one of those things. It's like, let's just tighten that up a little bit, you know, just, you know. So, but yeah, so yes, publishing has been always on the thing, but I think it was a really nice thing because I kind of just got tossed into the deep end. But I've had really good mentors the whole way that I know and that I've met via being a reader and a reader that interacts with authors. So it's been a good thing.
Yeah, and that's funny because the most people that we talk to, it was more that publishing paralysis where it took them 10 years instead of 28 days to actually publish. Which, but like, in a way, that's kind of awesome because you found out that you can do this, and you just have to do it, and
I feel like I had. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I feel like I had a really good leg up, I guess, because I've had a couple of mentors just in terms of the feasibility of publishing. Sarah Eden, she's one of like in the Latter-day Saint culture, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint culture. She's a really eminent romance author. And I started going to the Storymakers Conference pretty early on.
Yeah.
Like in my writing career. 2019 was actually also the year that I started going to that. And she had a really good class that's just like, it's publishing. It's not brain surgery. It's not heart surgery. Like you can do
Yeah.
this. This is a possibility. And then I also, the author that really, I call her my writing auntie. It's W.R. Gingell, who is one of my clean read recommendations, by the way. We'll have a couple of those as they go on because they've been
Okay.
really big influences.
Perfect.
But she was the one that, as I started going at, she was, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I adopted her as my auntie because she was very responsive in writing me back. And I'm like, hey, I have questions about publishing. This is something that I intend to do at some point. I just, the feeler kind of thing, like the
Yeah.
publishing paralysis, like before you realize what it actually is. But I enjoyed for my own sake because I can definitely see if I had waited, the publishing paralysis would have been incredibly real. But everything was really pushing me to that point because it was 2020. I just recently moved into my parents' basement because it was COVID and I wasn't doing super well living on my own. Like I just needed the mental bolstering of having people I knew and
Yeah.
loved. And so it was kind of like the perfect storm that pushed me into that in the first place. So yeah, I definitely agree. I personally think I needed to just be picked up and chucked straight into the publishing world and said, good job, have fun.
Yeah. Right.
Bye. Yeah. I
Well, and realistically, that first book that yes, you want it to be good and you don't want any errors and stuff, but it's not like 10,000 people are going to download that first book. So it's actually, I think, better experience to just publish and then fix it later. Do it as good as you can, but that's probably more valuable because it's not like there's a ton of people reading it and it's not hurting your reputation by doing that.
No, well, and I don't think it necessarily would even now. Like, you can definitely tell I've progressed as an author from then until now, but it's been like 4 years, so of course I have. And one of the things that I let me put it this way: I'm an advocate for mental health. I have struggled with it in my past, and so this is a really good way of giving myself the grace to make mistakes and have made mistakes and have them be public mistakes, but still saying my product is good. Like for the
Right.
person that I was at the time and the skills that I had at the time, this is a very good book. And I'll stand by that, because it is a very good book. Like its weaknesses notwithstanding, like it's still a good narrative. It still takes you along. It's still fun to read. And I'll stand by that. So yes and yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to how you write your series. That's interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you write it all at once, how do you figure out the ending and the start for each book? Is that part of the plan and up front, or is that a challenge?
Yes and no. A lot of mine lend to that in terms of timing. Each book that I've written has been a little bit different in that the structure of the book is a little bit different, and then also the needs of the book are a little bit different. With Wednesday's book, the arc is basically from when my main viewpoint character is brought into the resolution of the magical kerfuffle, as it were. So that's an easy arc, it's like he's brought in, it's done like, however many days later. I have a book called Oak and Ivy, which is takes place 13 days before Halloween. And so each chapter is a day. And so some chapters are super duper long and some are super duper short because of what happens during those days.
Right.
And then with I've got two series. One is an epic fantasy series that hasn't been published. That's the first one. That one, there are 4 seasons that take place and 4 specific goals that happen during that time. And so basically, I knew each of those goals would be the climax of the book because they have to achieve at least something by the end of the book. But that was going to be the, the climax. And so I knew it would end after each one of those. With the series that I am publishing now, like I've got the first book is actually publishing on Saturday.
Cool.
Each one is its own little, each one's its own little adventure. Where, the first one is where the two characters meet and they have a little kerfuffle, if you will, like things happen and suddenly they're a team. And so that's book one. And then each one kind of is centered around a planet that they're on because it's science fiction. And that's kind of how I do it. So I do look at the more like the most organic way to organize it, because it is a matter of organization. And then usually, if they're having adventures, there's a natural rise and fall to what they're doing there, how it's all working out. The plus side for me, at least, is I do think in story arcs, right? So I'm like, here's the beginning where they start, and here's their ultimate goal. So we've got, the wide arc, but what are the little arcs that they need to learn, or the things that they need to experience in order for this, end goal to be the most satisfactory for them to learn the most. And so I kind of break it up that way. So each one is going to be a little bit different. I've got a 5-book series that I'm planning right now. That's adaptive science fiction. It's like set in the future on Earth, where New York is just a platform. Like global warming has happened and the seas have risen like 200 feet and stuff like, catastrophe. Okay. But like New York has just built in a Tower of Babel type of deal. And so each book is going to be centered around a case that they do. So, it might take only a couple of days. It might take a couple of weeks. And so that's kind of where I start is just go from there. The nice thing about doing it that way, of course, is I can foreshadow properly. I can make sure that all of the hints that I want are in there. Like in this particular series that I'm working on, there's things that you learn in book 5 and book 6, like that start on Saturday, that you learn in book 5 and book 6 for real, but the foreshadowing is there sometimes from day one, like literally the first page. And then there's some things that that I can sprinkle in and make it so as information is unfolded, especially for the bigger reveals, that it's not so surprising. And so I prefer to work that way because plot holes are not only my nemesis, they're their pet peeve. And so, I'm not saying that I'm perfect or anything, but it's definitely a consideration that I like to take and I like to do it that way because it's more satisfying for me as a reader of my own work. So, and I have to read it 90 billion times. Yeah. So.
Yeah. My first book, I had no thoughts of anything. I just started writing and then at a later point, I decided, this could actually be a series, but the first book was pretty long, on the long end of the genre, and so I went back to see, can I split this one to make it books 1 and 2 of the series? And because there was no forethought or anything, the only place I could split was almost 2/3 of the way through. I'm like, that doesn't work. That had one teeny little book and one long one, so.
Massive.
I was stuck. So it's not crazy. It's like 120,000 words, but so it's not crazy. But it's for a first book in a series, it's pretty long. Usually they get longer as they go rather than shorter as they go. But it just was what it was. So
I think though there's a really good magic because Oak and Ivy, my Halloween book, I'll always call it my Halloween. It's even orange on the cover. 100% Halloween. I have a follow-up trilogy to that. I think one of the cool things that I'm learning that I have to consider, because I'm definitely still in the planning stage. Like I've got sort of an outline-ish for the book 1 in the trilogy, because it focuses on one of the side characters, but it'll bring the main characters from Oak and Ivy back in. And have them be main players in this trilogy. But it's been really interesting for me in the series, like planning another series based off of a standalone book, because it's meant to be a standalone book and works really well as a standalone book. That, is like, how do I not undermine the tension of the first book, which is my big thing, because Oak and Ivy is a suspense. It's an urban fantasy suspense thriller. And I'm like, I have never seen another one. They're like, give me your comps, and I'm like, I don't have any. But it's also, how do I not undermine the tension of the first book, but also how do I give it its own that's not just replaying the first one. So as
Right.
I respect you for doing that, because I'm still in the planning stage to make it as satisfying as possible. Because for me, they have to be satisfying stories. I'm not just going to write a book and
Yes.
release it to release a book. Like, each one is going to mean something special to me, and I'm going to know these characters and I'm going to love them. So
Yeah. So
here's my thing. I'll never be
I'm
a high
also
release. Oh, sorry.
I'm also a multiple genre writer. And I get people all the time, well, what genre do you write? And I'm like, well, I write this and I write that and I write that. And how do you answer that question?
I usually answer it. I write genres that I want to read. So I'll probably always be a primarily fantasy writer, or there will be elements of fantasy, like things that you usually see in fantasy. Like, I write very much like a fantasy writer, but I always say I write the books that I want to read. So I've written, fantasy, sci-fi. I've got a little bit of horror / suspense thriller. And so, like, usually what I'll do is, if they ask for a recommendation for one of my books, I'll recommend depending on who I think they are, and I'm like, you might enjoy this one, or you might enjoy this one. But I think I always answer, I write the books I want to read. I do write for adults, not adult content, but I do write, with adult main characters and stuff, largely because I'm like, I want to represent myself. I want 30-year-olds who have, done stuff and know, have fully developed brains and stuff. But, it's definitely like, I write what I want to
read. Do you ever do any crosses between, or connections between the books of different genres? Or do you keep them separated?
So far I've kept them separated. I think the thing that I've tried to do cross genre before, and the thing that I always run into is the books get very busy, and not in a good way. It's like wearing plaid and stripes, where it's just kind of like there's a lot going on, kind of thing. Now, within my books, I will have micro genres, like definitely subplots and stuff like that. I'm a firm believer that if the book's going to be scary in a part, let it be scary. If it's going to be, cutesy and fluffy in the moment, like, let it be cutesy and fluffy. Let each moment have its own genre, if you will, but with an overarching theme. And so I'm just trying to, in the series that I have written but have not released, it's called Heart of Stone. Like, the series is called Heart of Stone. I have one of the main viewpoint characters is the villain, and so his scenes tend to definitely swing over into horror at times. Like, there's 2 scenes in particular. Most of my stuff, I can say this can be read by absolutely everyone. This one, I will probably say maybe keep it 13 plus, just because I'm definitely going to write it in a way where if a 10-year-old picks it up and reads it, it's not going to be like, I did not need that mental picture, kind of a deal. But it's also one of those things that the older you get with the implications, you're going to be like, this man is a psycho, like, sort of thing. And so I try and, in terms of cross genre, I definitely try and keep it organized in a way, but I do try and let each moment have its own, because there are going to be parts that are just straight up funny. Like, in Wednesday's book, there's a moment, the main character is a cat, and there's a point where she's just knocking glasses off the counter because her, the main character is not doing what she wants. She goes, I need you to listen to me. Gone one glass. You're still not listening to me. Gone one glass. Sort of thing. And, like, just kind of like the little, I'm going to do what I want until you do what I want, kind of deal. And I try and let each moment rest in that case. So I feel like
that makes sense. I've got the series, and then I had a Western that connects because it's his ancestors. Like, the series main character, it's his ancestors. But then I tried it in another one where it's a thriller, but there's a Western and contemporary. So what I did is I made it the story happen at the exact same location, but separated by 175 years. So each chapter went back and forth,
Oh,
and
awesome.
it was fun. It was fun to write. Difficult because my brain had to switch, and instead of writing one story and then the other, I went back and forth. I wrote it in sequence,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it it was a challenge, but it was fun. It, it was fun to
Yeah.
do.
Well,
So
and yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I do have, in that vein, I do have a couple of books in the future. Like, I've got in the same world as Wednesday's book, I do have a couple of books planned. One's a Regency, not romance, it's a Regency buddy cop
Okay.
book. And I do have a suspense thriller that is World War II, but vampire hunting. So
Okay.
is that kind of a thing. So I will make genres like that. Like, I have no problem mashing them together. But it is
Yeah.
definitely sort of thing where, because you're coming from Wednesday's book, which is not largely a comedy, but has definite comedic elements, I'm like, okay, how do I transfer that to my World War II Dracula crossover?
Right.
You know,
And
kind
then
of a deal. It's like, so I'm
how do
like,
you market them when they're cross genres is also hard, because
exactly.
you have to, like, Amazon, they all funnel you into picking and choosing a specific category. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, well, it's kind of
But
this, but it's
I think
also
it's
kind of
nice though,
that.
because
Which
we
one is
do
it
see a little
primarily?
bit
And
of
are
historical
people going to be
fantasy on the
upset if they think
rise.
it's this and then
And
they
so,
read
like,
it? And,
with E.B. Wheeler's A Proper Dragon series, she's also got a Victorian one. I think the first one's called Cruel Magic. So there is, even in W.R. Gingell has a couple that are Korean based, so like Korean historic based, which is
yeah,
really, really cool in and of itself. So it's like, whoa, like you went there. And so I've seen it pop up even more and more. Like, even Sarah Eden has one coming up that's a time traveler thing in where it goes from, I believe, Regency to Victorian, or no, French Revolution to Victorian.
hmm
I could be saying that wrong. I promise I'm a fan. Don't come at me. But like, and so I really love the switching back and forth. I think the thing for me that's the hardest is the research. Not because I don't like researching, but it's also like finding the exact right details that I need. One
right.
of the things that I'm really struggling with right now is, and if anybody knows this, like, let me know. There is a bombing in Bremen, like a bombing mission in November 1943. And I'm trying to find out when their cathedral was bombed, because at one point it was like completely burned out and everything like that. And of course, I'm like, what a great place to have a final vampire fight, kind of a deal, in a
Yeah.
burning cathedral, because, ha ha ha, the drama, which is what we all live for anyway. And so I'm trying to find out where this is. I'm like, I need to write the person, but I'm also kind of like, how weird is it to say, hi, do you have the exact dates where each section of the damage happened? Because on one it was nearly not touched, the next it was slightly burned, and the next it was, or like, it was bombed. And nobody, like, at what point did it actually become structurally damaged where a vampire could
Yeah.
enter, kind of a deal. And so I'm like, how do I say that without sounding absolutely crazy? And so, especially to like a curator of this church. And so I'm like, tell me more, kind of a deal. So that, I think, is the
I'm
thing.
doing
But
research
it's
for a
so,
book.
yeah, that is a fantasy. Like, because I'm also writing historical. Like I said, I write pretty much every genre. Like, I think
hmm
every book that I've written so far has been a different genre in some way, because it's so fun to try out little tidbits. It's like being at a buffet where I'm like, okay, now I'm going to try this. Okay, now I'm going to try
Yeah.
this. And they're all written by me. So I'm like, oh, look, I like them. But one of the things I actually want to write is a Korean War historical fiction. Like, no magic, just historical fiction. And now I am learning the meaning of research, because I can't even say this was it. Like, this is an effect because magic exists in the world. Like, kind of thing. Like, because
Right.
even if I never find out what dates that, cathedral gets burned down, I can always say, well, the timeline shifted because in this universe magic exists, kind of a deal.
Right.
But
Right.
like, in real stuff, I'm like, I can't just pretend that this didn't happen on this day because it did. And
Right.
the interesting thing about Korean War is they call it the Forgotten War for a reason.
Hmm.
Because like in World War II, you can pick up a National Geographic or a the my some of my favorite sources are the Smithsonian pictorial books, where you have acres and acres of just data, and it's removed. Like, you can have some personal stories, but a lot of it is just fact driven, where like, this happened this day, this is the stuff that led into this. And in the Korean War, what I'm finding is most of the information is brought through personal accounts. Like,
Hmm.
most of the stories that they have, most of the information about particular movements is through personal accounts, and it is a much different experience than just reading from it about it from a bird's eye view. Like, because it's
Yeah.
not just, hey, like, this happened, this troop movement happened here. It's, hey, we marched 15 miles, my feet were frozen, my buddy Joe died from frostbite, and my other buddy David died from being shot in the face. Like, and you're
Yeah.
like, this is a different tone. Like, and it's a little bit different, like, trying to bring all that in, and not get
Right.
super depressed by it. And that's one of the things, is I actually had to take a break recently, because I was like, I'm getting very depressed.
Hmm.
And like, I really want to write this book, but it's sorting. So
It's possible that the specific like military units, battalions and such have their own histories that if you contact them, they
and
might.
yeah. And that's what I'm starting to realize I had to do, because I did find one. Like, you said that, and I'm like, yes, I found one. And it was so nice, because it was just like, this moved this here. And that's where you get some of the coolest stories, I feel like, because number one, you can kind of mimic, because I'm making up my own battalion, because I'm like, there's no
Yeah.
way that I'm going to be able to accurately describe this without offending someone, and that's absolutely what I don't want to do. Like,
Right. Right.
so I'm just going to make it my own and kind of mirror a little bit, and like, put them in a slightly different position. It'll actually aid in my fiction part the
Yeah.
best, because then I can say this happened to them, and as long as I make it plausible, it's not like, really, kind of thing, that never happened. I'm
Yeah.
like, of course it never happened. It's fiction, but thank you so much. I'm going to make it up.
Yeah. So at some point you made a decision, whether conscious or subconscious, to keep your books clean. How did that
Mhm.
work for you?
Um, Partially it was how I was raised. My mom was very conscientious about the content in our books. At some point, we, went and read our own things, ran into our own things, kind of a deal. But
Yeah.
for me, I just never, with those kind of books, I never felt at ease. Like, people would always tell me just skip over those parts, and some I did. Um, I think I don't even think I own a physical copy of those particular books. Like, because there was a couple that I skipped over those pages and enjoyed the book, but you never feel at ease. And I personally never feel like I can recommend those books, because
Hmm.
it always feels like I'm recommending that part. And so
Right.
it became a conscious decision, largely because I don't want to read that, and so I don't want to write that. Um, One of the funniest things that I see on social media and stuff like that from people who do is like, man, I hope nobody looks over my shoulder while I write this. And I don't like that feeling. I am like, I have a hard time, enough time with kissing scenes, like, where I'm just like, they kissed, kind of thing, and I blushed bright red, kind of deal. And like, and I like writing kissing scenes, but those are the scenes that I'm like, please do not let my father walk up behind my computer right this second. Like, he can read it later if he absolutely wants to, but not right
Yeah.
now, kind of deal. And so I can't even imagine going any further with that. And it's the same thing with profanity. Like, I don't use it myself. It's something that I don't feel like adds to my elevation of language, or, my standard of language that I want to have. It's, and it probably helps that I have a day job where people do swear at me on not a daily basis, but at least a weekly basis. And I'm like, it doesn't make you feel good. Like,
Yeah.
and my idea behind my books, even if I take you through some crazy, dramatic, kind of scary stuff, I want you to feel good at the end. Like, my sister described Oaken Ivy this way. She goes, I was terrified to walk across my dark room. but I had no problem falling asleep afterwards. And it's that kind of a thing where I'm like, I want you to feel the feels in the book, but I still want you to enjoy real life afterwards. And so,
Right.
and that's kind of where I come from. Like it's I want to enjoy my life. I want to be proud. I want to be able to recommend it to anybody. Like where it is something that people enjoy and find hope in and really just feel good about life afterwards. And
Yeah.
so it's that I think is where it comes from, but also just kind of being raised to it and realizing the value in universally enjoyable fiction. So.
Yeah. Do you ever think there's a disadvantage in the marketplace for writing for clean books?
I don't think so. Mostly because there is a book for every reader or a reader for every book. And for those who feel like they're at a disadvantage yet haven't found their audience yet. And we know that there is an audience for clean books because we're both here.
Yeah.
And so it really comes down to a matter of marketing, because I'm like, what if you're marketing to the wrong people because you don't want to write a clean book for the spicy people, because the spicy people don't want clean books. And you're going to be disappointed if you try, if you're writing to change people's minds, often you are disappointed.
Right.
Because it either comes off very sanctimonious or holier than thou, or it comes off as I'm going to change your mind, and people will set themselves against that. And so for me, when I write these books, primarily they're for myself, and so I don't read spicy books, so I don't know why I would write one. But it's also going, this is my book, and I want to share my books, but they're ultimately mine. And so if I'm my target audience, I will never be at a disadvantage. Now, granted, I am a hobby writer. I have a regular day job and I write, for 3 hours in the afternoon, and that's about it. But it's definitely one of those things that I don't feel like I have suffered from having clean fiction, because the stories that I'm telling don't have those things in them. And so that's where I'm at.
And I think you're right that it is all about finding your audience. And I think sometimes the issue with that is if you go on Bookstagram or Book Talk or anything, it's so inundated with spicy stuff that you think that that's what everybody wants. And it's a false representation of
it is
readership.
I also have found that people who read at a higher spice level will often come down and read not spicy stuff if they want. Like, there's so many hybrid, I hate to even divide them that way, but there's so many hybrid readers that you're more likely, like, you're including more people by having less explicit content or less profanity or less, and in a way you're being more inclusive. I think it's really interesting because the fact of the matter is sex sells. That's it. So the things that are really racy or really, explicit, they are going to create more hype because it's shocking. And that's it. Like, it's shocking. Like, you're like, you'll never guess what they put in there. And you're like, I don't want to. Thank you very much. I'm not old enough for that. But for me, I feel like my books might have more lasting power because my demographic is larger. But also it is going to be more timeless because, I don't have to worry about handing it to my grandchild whenever I have grandchildren. I don't have to worry about handing it to my grandmother. I don't have, and so it's something that could realistically be passed down and down, because I'm sorry, you should not be handing spicy books to a 13-year-old or an 8-year-old. And so I'm creating a better demographic for myself. And so I don't feel like I'm sabotaging myself. I don't feel like I'm shooting myself in the foot, as it were, because I'm writing without the explicit content or the explicit language, because it's really not. It's opening more doors. The thing to remember is the algorithm drives. So what you have looked at, what you have consumed is what you are going to be fed in the future. So if you want more clean reads, look for more clean reads content creators, like people
Yeah.
that you know, and really honestly, you can curate that, because that's what I've curated in my own social media stuff.
Yeah.
Where if I find
Yeah.
something, I'm
Yeah.
like, I know that book is not for me. I will say, please hide this. I don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah. And it seems like the default, like when you first go on, it does throw that stuff at you, but you're absolutely right. As you curate, as you say, not interested, not interested, it will slowly start to move to what you want to see. And I've noticed,
Well,
just as part of this project, doing research and stuff, one of the things I've done is gone into libraries and looked up books that were spicy and ones that were not. And it seems, and I haven't kept any data on this, so it's more anecdotal, but it seems like the clean books are always, I have to put a hold on them because there's a line for them. But the spicy books I could check out right away if I wanted to. And I don't
yeah.
know what that says. I haven't dived into that as much, but it seems to be a pretty common trend.
Well, and something that I found as well is that if you want your 15 minutes of fame, that's where you go. And so a lot of writers, in the hopes that they will get big quick, want to write that kind of material because they want to get big. But like, I'm thinking, I don't want to name drop that. That would not be classy. But there's a couple of recent ones that were really big, really fast. And some have remained really big, really fast, and remained big. Like there are certain explicit content authors, and I'm sure you can think of some, and I can think of some that are bestsellers. But I don't know many people who have reread them. I also don't know
Yeah.
many people that, if they have read them, can differentiate one volume from another. And so it's
Yeah.
one of those things that a lot of them have been written for the explicit content, which is what, if that's what you're into, that's what you're into. But
Right.
I have found more people, when they're reading, the cleaner content has to rely on the story and the characters. And so, like, because they don't have the titillating stuff to draw
Right.
you in and keep you there. Like, and so you have to rely on other things for your dopamine fix. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what do you do to market yourself and find your audience?
I've been really lazy. I'm not gonna lie. When I first came out, most of what I did was, it was for my sister, right? So I was like, I'm not really gonna put much effort into this. I'm not really gonna worry about it too much. I didn't really have any idea what I was doing anyway, so I was like, I'm gonna send it to one or two people. I'm gonna put up a Facebook ad. Like, that's what I'm gonna do. Like, it'll be on Kindle Unlimited for a while, but I knew I wanted to go wide with my backlist just so it would be available to more people.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So when I started marketing for Oak and Ivy, I was still learning, so I only got it out to like two people. That one wasn't on Amazon Kindle Unlimited at all. Like I just never did it. And I found out that way, by harsh experience, that most of my readers are on Amazon, and they will read through Amazon first. You can tell because they're only 9 months apart. Wednesday's book has twice the amount of reviews and readers that Oak and Ivy has. It's also a different genre, so there are other considerations, and I totally get it.
Right.
I'm still
Yeah.
proud of that book. I'm like, I love that book. I'll recommend it to anybody. But the difference between those two is the amount of effort that I put into exposure as well. Because one of the things I did know from the beginning, that there was going to be a wider readership for Wednesday's book than Oak and Ivy. There's no romance in Oak and Ivy. Wednesday's book, there's funny cats, and I don't give my main characters a break really in either of them. But like Oak and Ivy, there's a little bit more tension and stuff. So I knew that there was going to be differences there. But the things that have helped in this coming release, and what I've seen and helped with in other authors as well, like a lot of my experience has come with helping with launches for other authors as well during my hiatus, because there's been a 3-year period about where I haven't published anything. And one of the things that I've chosen to do is be on a lot of street teams, a lot of advanced reader copy teams. I've done it for traditional publishers. I've done it for indie authors. I've tried to get as much experience as I can by helping. And so, and just to help, not to say this is, token in your ledger, kind of thing. You owe me something else. Never anything like that. Like,
Right.
A lot of the controversy nowadays, like, I don't know if you're on Threads or anything like that. It's sometimes really funny to watch the tea going on, as the youth say, because a lot of it has been very, very selfish, where people are like, I'm going to do this and you're going to promote my book, or I sent you this and you said, yes, you wanted it. So I signed you up for my newsletter, which is illegal, by the way. Never sign anybody up for your newsletter. Let them do it themselves. They have to opt in. It is the law. I did not do that myself, but I watched somebody's character get trashed in real time because they did that. And don't do that because you can't sue. But, doing with things with the sake of learning and helping other people get ahead and stuff. And so a lot of what I've done to market it is largely post about it myself, but also find a lot of people, or at least a couple people. This is essentially my science fiction debut. So I'm starting over from scratch on this one. But finding people who want to read your book, let them read your book, which is why advanced reader copies are a thing. And then let them be happy about it and share them being happy about it. And I do have 2 different Instagram handles. I'm in the book world, I'm largely on Instagram the most, just because I'm not super great at reels or anything like that. So like TikTok is still one of those big beastie things that I'm like, I'm good. But I have people posting about my work on TikTok. And so I've gone through I'm going to recommend this book to some of my friends who I think will like it, and then let them recommend it as well. Recommendations are by far the best way to get actual books into people's hands, because when it comes from an author saying you should read my book, you're like, of course you think I should read your book, you wrote it. But if it's a friend who's read it and said, I like it for this, 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 and this, then it's suddenly a much more personal recommendation, and saying you would like this book because you like these things, and these things are in this book. So I might never make it viral, I might never make it big, but my goal is to get my books into the right readers' hands so the right people can enjoy it. So
that's awesome. And it's a great, that you have a very realistic perspective and focus, rather than the please everybody love me, because that just doesn't work. So
that happens, but not on social media.
Right.
Like, there's definitely the days where I'm like, will someone just please buy my book? Like, I need someone to love me today. And that's usually when I go read through my reviews, and that makes it worse, because I've
don't
been
do
called,
that.
oh man, it is so bad. Never, as my advice as an author to other prospective authors, leave Goodreads alone. Like, just don't go on there as an author. Like, you can go review other people's work. That's totally fine. Do not look up your own stuff. As of today, for ARC readers, I'll go and look at a couple just to make sure that I'm not, shall we say, deluding myself. Because if everybody's like, this is really terrible, like, I tried to like it and couldn't, then that's something that I'm like, I need to take a closer look at this, like look at their, especially pre-release. But that should happen during the beta read stage. At this point, I'm like, okay, I know that my ARC readers like it. Like, I've got it to the right people. They'll say good things about it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And so I'll often look at the number of reviews, because after a certain number of reviews, the algorithm drives it a little bit more. But it's out of my hands. Like, don't read your reviews. Don't do it. And so all the please love me stuff does not happen on social media. Social media is not your therapy. Don't use it like it.
Yeah, it's amazing the things people are willing to say on social media, and Goodreads is just its own animal.
It's a beast. It is
It's
a beast.
and it's frustrating from an author point of view. For people who aren't familiar, it's connected to Amazon. So when you publish on Amazon, it populates in Goodreads, but it's about 50% of the time it puts my books under a different Marcus Williams. It just puts them under the wrong, even though in my Amazon account they're all in a row, but on Goodreads it's like 2 or 3 different places, and so it's a pain just as an author to organize it. But the people
Yeah.
who are active on Goodreads, I feel like they expect every single book to be Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and more than that, I feel like they treat it as half journal, half book review.
yeah.
I feel like a lot of and I mean, this is from someone who has used Goodreads to review books, and so I mean, but I am, if I don't like a book enough to say something negative about it, let me put it that way, I probably won't post an actual review. I'll
Mhm.
do a star rating, but I won't do a review. And the reason for that is it doesn't matter after a certain point. The book's already published. There's nothing that I could say that would change things. I'm thinking of a specific book when I say this, that there were things that I just disagreed with in the plot, that I'm like, this is not who you've set your character up to be. This is not anything that there's no way you could get from point A to point B and have point B make sense the way you've written it. But there was nothing that I could say to make it, number one, change the outcome of the book. Like, it was published by a publisher. Like, this was not an indie book that I'm like, maybe take it back for a second, and look at it. Like, it was done. And so I'm like, at some point, you have to remember it. Like, I was watching Ratatouille last week, as you do, kind of thing. And the Ego's review at the end of Remy really hit home to me this time, because I was like, critiques in the end don't really matter, because they're nice when they spread things. Sometimes there's this phenomenon of advertising through 1-star reviews, which I think is sometimes really hilarious, but especially in the practice of tagging authors when they're bad reviews, or even looking at your own bad reviews, there's nothing positive that really comes from it. The only positive that I can possibly think is sometimes if it is watch for typos, watch for, like, if everybody is saying the ending is too rushed, maybe look in your future book to make sure you don't rush the ending. That being said, a good ending will almost always seem rushed because you're running to the end because you want to see what happens.
And you want more. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's one of those things is always a better idea to stay away from reviews.
Yeah, I think the only times I've read or that I've written a review that I've decided where I didn't like the book and I decided to write one wasn't to trash the book. It was more to say, just for information for other readers that they look at it, where I'd say, these are the things in it that are not my favorite. You may love them, but this is what's in this book. So if you're a reader trying to make a decision, here's some information for you.
One of the things that I've seen coming up more and more is content awareness. And there are certain, if it's done well, it is a great informational tool. There are some things I have started including them in my books, because there are some things that I feel like are wide enough trigger points, like child loss, like, abuse,
right.
like, stuff like that it's better to know going in, where some people are like, yeah, I experienced it, I've worked through, I can read about it, or I trust this author enough to portray it in a way that's not going to be inherently damaging. There are some people that have to avoid it at all costs. And what I have done in my book coming up is I have put a note at the beginning of the book saying content awareness. If this is something that you need to look at, this is the page that it's on. And I've done it that way because there are some people that are like, I don't want to know anything about this book going in. I don't want to know anything at all. And I do put a disclaimer saying this is not going to be a comprehensive list of everything that's in, because that's spoilers, and which I don't want to do. That's the only reason why I even debated putting a content warning in my books at all, is
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, there are spoilers, because these things matter to the book. Like, I'm not just putting them in because I'm like, I need drama, childhood abuse,
Yeah.
kind of thing. That's not what I'm doing it for, kind
Right.
of thing. Is like, this happened to build this person into who they are now.
Yeah.
But if that's something, if it's a common enough or a damaging enough trope, as it were, or even just backstory happening, I want them to at least have a heads up that it's in there.
Yeah, I've done it once, and I did kind of the same thing. A note at the beginning of the book, and the book has domestic violence in it, so it was more a note of what how I tried to portray it. Like, it was important to the story, so
Exactly. Well, and that's what you got to do, because you're never, and I put this in my disclaimer, I'm never going to be able to give every warning to every person. That's
Right.
not the way, that's not feasible. That's not a healthy way of me driving my book, where I'm like, well, I'm going to make sure that, this person said this mean thing on page 69, so like skip it. Like,
Right.
there has to be some sort of self accountability and self management. I can't manage anybody else, and it's not healthy for me to try. And so I really try and put as much warning as I can, but there are going to be general warnings, because I am writing a book that has twists and turns, and they're going to be in there. But I can't account for every trauma that has happened. If in a perfect world, it would be great. Like, if people talk to me and say, "Hey, is there this?" Like, come and write me and say one-on-one, "Is there this in your book?" I can say yes or no,
answer,
and that's just fine. But I can't say, here's a list of all the terrible things that happen. That's a terrible way of marketing, first of all. Like, please judge me by my trauma that I put my characters.
And essentially, you're just telling them to read the book.
Exactly. Like, and that's what it comes down to. I'm like, these things are in the book. Like, read it. Come to your own conclusions. But I also hope that I bring these things sensitively enough, that, or at least written in a way that isn't going to be inherently damaging to the reader. That's one of the things that my mom instilled in me, that says, she likes to point to the outsiders, because she doesn't like being dragged through the muck and mud of, all these different terrible things that have happened. And she points to The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton as a really good example, where she's like, I read this book, I understood what they were going through, I didn't feel dirty or dragged down afterwards. I still felt good and whole after this. And I mean, I've read books that have done that really well. Like, I studied Victorian literature, British Victorian literature in school. Like, there are some books that you finish and you're like, well, here we are. Like, I will call the sun out because this guy has been dead for like 160 years. It is Jude the Obscure. Terrible book. I hated that book. I'm so sorry. We read Dracula right after, and collectively as a class, we're like, oh, good, it's only murder. Like,
right. Dracula's great.
So Dracula's a great book. Like, I'm writing a retelling essentially afterward, but like, it's one of those things that I was like, I don't want to write books that leave you hopeless afterwards. And so as I write, and that drives my clean content just as much as my like including difficult topics. I'm not afraid to include difficult topics. I want to include difficult topics because fiction and books, and especially in the fantasy genre and the sci-fi genre, you can pack in so much. But because fantasy is removed from reality and sci-fi is removed from reality, you can tackle these in a way where it's actually easier to wrap your head around, because you're not like, oh my goodness, this could happen to my neighbor. It's happening in a galaxy far, far away. Like, and so it's almost easier to go over the topic a little bit more and really explore it in a way that you can't in contemporary fiction, because it's so far removed from the audience, and so they don't take it as personally, so they can just, and not in a way of looking at it like a zoo animal, but kind of saying, okay, this has happened in the book, and then as you get older and you're able to process things more, saying, oh, this happens in real life. Because that's the way it happened for me, is I read about all these different things that happened, and then as I grew up, I'm like, oh, this is something that happens. And so and the wonderful things about books is you can experience it first person. without
Yeah.
needing to go through it yourself. That's been pointed out to me as one of the best parts about fiction, and I absolutely agree, because you can step into somebody's shoes in a way that you can't otherwise. And so I have no problem with putting difficult topics in. I try and present them in the most respectful way that I can. I talk to a lot of people I try to talk to people who've gone through it or have had experiences helping people through it. But you have to put it in there. It's not something that you can avoid entirely. It would be a blank page. It would be
Right.
really hard. It would be the perfect scenario of a perfect life, in your opinion. And that's not riveting fiction.
And it's not interesting. It's not.
It's really not. Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody has the idea of what a perfect life is anyway. So, write your book.
Right. Awesome. Well, we are about out of time. Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. So
Yeah.
I'm going to jump back into the truth and a lie, but I noticed that you actually put the answer when you filled out the form.
Did I?
So
Oh dear.
I'm not going to get any
Yes.
points, but we'll read them again, and then I'll let you tell us why.
Sorry
So
about
number
that.
one, try. I ate camel in a restaurant in Dubai. I once fell on a table in front of several well-known authors and publishers during a writing conference because I was dancing too vigorously. And 3,
Yes.
I spent my teenage years in England. So number 3 is the lie, is what you said.
Is the
right?
lie. Yes.
Okay. So
And the funny thing is
camel
I
in
actually,
Dubai, huh?
yes. I don't like it. It's very gamey. I was actually going over to India to help teach martial arts to vulnerable women over
Okay.
there, which is another story in and of itself. And we got stranded in Dubai for 3 days. And it's the first and only time, hopefully, that I'll ever have been deported. And we were able to go back to India right away. But we spent a couple days in Dubai, and one of my people on our trip was like, "We have to try this." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" It's biryani,
Yeah,
which
try it.
I love Indian food, but biryani is very dry, and so I didn't like it in the first place. And then it was camel on top of that, and I'm like, this just doesn't seem worth it. The table story is it was Storymakers. It was my first year, and basically it was so it's 2019, and we were sitting at the table, and I had my host. Her name's Holly Joe. I can't remember her last name. I'm so sorry. But she was sitting right there, and then I had Stephanie Black, who's a good friend of mine now, probably because she saw me fall down onto the table. And I believe Lisa Mangum was also at the table, who's one of the lead publishers for Shadow Mountain, and just like a couple of other people, and we were like, "Yo, I'm an editor here, I'm an editor here, I'm an editor here," and I'm like, "Great!" Like, because I hadn't fallen down yet. And then they're like, "All the first year people stand up and dance." And so I danced, I turned, I tripped, and just fell smack onto the table. And I was like, who needs alcohol? Like, nobody needs that. I can do it on my own. And then for the lie, I actually spent my teenage years in Russia. So Russia. So we lived in down by the Black Sea in Novorossiysk, which is about 6 hours away from Rostov. Unfortunately, people know where that is now. It's also about 6 hours away from Sochi. So let's focus on the Olympics. So I lived there for about 4 years, and then I lived in Moscow for 5. My dad worked in that.
Cool.
So yeah, it was a really wonderful experience. I feel like it's informed a lot of my writing. It definitely helped expand my world. But yeah, those are my 2 truths and a lie.
Awesome. No, those are great stories. Well, thank you again so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. For all of you out there listening or watching, please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and please share. That's the best way to get the word out about these clean authors and about the podcast, is by sharing it with your friends. We really appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.